All right, I want to do a quick puzzle here. 1 plus 1 times 0 plus 1 equals. This is one I've seen online. A good test of your knowledge of the order of operations convention. So first of all, let's back up and talk about what is the order of operations convention. It's number one, you solve anything in parentheses or brackets following the order of operations. You have three operations levels here. You have exponents, sometimes called indices or orders. Same thing, parentheses, they're sometimes referred to as brackets. If you maybe have learned BODMAS or BEDMAS or some other acronym. Multiplication and division are then solved left to right after any exponents. Multiplication and division have equal precedence. Number four, you would solve addition and subtraction left to right. And again, addition and subtraction are equal precedence as well. If there are no parentheses or exponents, you would start with multiplication or division, solving left to right. And then lastly, again, like I said, you would solve your addition and subtraction left to right. So we take a look at this problem. If we're following the order of operations, let's do that first. This is the convention that's been used for nothing's really changed in 100 years. It has its roots back in the 16th century. Um, so you would start with multiplication. We don't have any parentheses. We don't have any exponents. So right off the bat, I want to get rid of the myth that I see where people think, oh, you'd have to have parentheses around the multiplication. No, that's not true. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I just want to hammer home the convention. So 1 times 0 is 0. And then you do your addition and subtraction left to right. So 1 plus 0 plus 1 equals 2. All right, so let's go back and look at it again. Another way you can solve this problem is just move the multiplication first. It's still the same problem. We're not changing what we're multiplying. We're not changing what we're adding. We're just doing the multiplication first. So you can see 1 plus 1 times 0 plus 1 is the same thing as 1 times 0 plus 1 plus 1. So when you solve that, 1 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 2. So let that sink in for a minute if you need to. So another thing I see a lot is I see people confusing multiplication by 0, where I've had people say, well, if I have 10 pencils, I times them by 0, I still have my 10 pencils. So I think there's a fundamental disconnect that some people have on multiplication by 0. They don't realize it's a grouping. You're talking about groupings of items. Like if I said, I gave you 0 bags of 12 donuts, how many donuts did you get? You didn't get any donuts because I gave you 0 bags of 12 donuts. It's not about the 12 donuts, it's about how many groupings, that you have. So, in the same way, another way to look at it is if you pay somebody $50 an hour and they work 0 hours, do you think you owe them $50 or do you think you owe them 0? Do you want to, do you want to die on the hill of saying 50 times 0 is 50? I mean, if you want to, I mean, that person's going to be real happy getting their $50 for not doing any work, but I guarantee 50 times 0 is 0. So just keep that in mind. I need to mention that because I know a few people are having some issues with multiplication by 0. There's still another method to do this, and this is one of the fundamental things. This is one of the fundamental concepts that makes order of operations not some arbitrary, mindless convention. Some people have that impression. But when you understand what multiplication is, you can actually replace multiplication with addition. Because what is multiplication after all? Multiplication is just repeated addition. So this one's really simple because what does it mean to say 1 times 0? It's basically saying you have one zero, so really it's the same thing as adding a zero. What if I had a million zeros? You'd still have zero, right? A million zeros is still zero. 0 millions is still zero. So 1 plus 0 plus 1 is going to be equal to 2. So going back to this order of operations thing, you can apply this in any problem. But rather than memorize like a PEMDAS or a BODMAS or a BIDMAS or a BEDMAS or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I've gone into some forums where I've seen like physicists, mathematicians explaining this stuff, and then the very first comment comes from somebody who's uninformed, and they go, "Well, that's not true because PEMDAS will solve it one way and BODMAS will solve it another because PEMDAS says to do the multiplication before division and BODMAS says do the division before the multiplication. So there, they're basically saying like in your face, Mr. Physicist slash mathematician. I mean, that to me, that just highlights the insanity of memorizing acronyms because people will memorize those acronyms. They memorize the order of 6 letters, left to right, and they think that is the rule, just like that. But what they don't understand, if you would understand this page, you wouldn't care about those acronyms anymore and getting them wrong and imagining there's some kind of a checklist. Multiplication is simply repeated addition. Division is basically the same thing as multiplication. You're multiplying by a reciprocal. Exponents are repeated multiplication. 5 to the second power is 5 times 5. 5 to the third power is 5 times 5 times 5. It's much easier to write in terms of exponents than, if you had 100 fives all being multiplied together, you'd rather write it in an exponential form. And that's exactly what multiplication is doing too. Rather than writing 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, you can say 10 times 5 or 10 times 6, whatever that is. It's much easier. So, think of them as shorthand. So naturally, exponents, are going to have priority over multiplication because it's repeated multiplication. And then multiplication is repeated addition. So your multiplication or division should have precedence over addition and subtraction. When you get to parentheses, those are just grouping symbols. They're not operations. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing are operations. They're mathematical operations. Parentheses are just grouping symbols that tell you that you need to resolve the operations inside of those parentheses before you solve anything outside of the parentheses. But the biggest confusion I see is people think that, well, if there's no parentheses around my multiplication, then it must be okay to add first, and that's not right. You have to understand the relationship between multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So if you were just to understand this one page, you could do any of these problems and get them right. The order of operations convention is not arbitrary, and it makes sense. So I hope this video has been helpful. I've got a few other puzzles on my a page and some other descriptions, a little more info on order of operations and other conventions. So the Math Puzzle Crash Course is on YouTube and also on Facebook, and I appreciate any likes, comments, shares. If you're in a forum and you want some information, feel free to link and share, and I do appreciate that very much. So thanks again and have a good day.